Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, going to be discussing Black Stone Heart by Michael R. Fletcher, the first book in the Obsidian Path series. And this was my first book by Michael R. Fletcher. He's an author who's been on my radar for quite some time, largely, if not completely in part, due to Slowly Read. Him not only talking about the books, but he actually has an interview with Michael R. Fletcher that was really fascinating where they talked about some of his different books. Plus, he's even around on Slowly Read's Discord sometimes, so I've got to interact with him, which has just been awesome, getting to know him a little bit more, and he seems like an awesome guy, which just really made me even more excited to read his books. And so I finally got started and decided to do Black Stone Heart first. This one it's pretty short. There's 2 books out in the series, and I got both, and so I thought this would be a good way to kind of start out, see what he's about. And then I start this book, and it is very unique, and it's just not quite like anything I've ever read before. And the way it shifts tones is just crazy. It does it so abruptly, yet so smoothly, that you don't even really notice until all of a sudden you have the notice of like, wait, what's going on now? This was such a tonal shift. And it's done in a really great way. In a lot of books that could be super jarring if you just shift the tone like that so much. But in this book, when we start out at the beginning with our main character Crane, and we have this like dark, visceral, like brooding, he seems kind of more like animalistic, just like existing. And we very quickly, as his journey continues, move into a very different feeling that doesn't pull you out of it at all. It actually, you start reading it and you're like, oh wait, we're doing a different thing now. And so it was really, really interesting just getting a feel for it. And at some points it felt like there were several different stories going on at once, even following only one main character, which I thought was really cool. So this book, I should probably talk a little bit about what it's about. And we follow our main character Crane, and he literally had his heart shattered, his heart made of obsidian, and he doesn't know why it was made of obsidian. He doesn't know who shattered it or why they shattered it. All he knows is that there's these other pieces of him basically, and like some of the other pieces of the heart have grown into other versions of himself basically, and he has a kind of like a longing, a need. He feels the pull of the other pieces, and so he's trying to literally go find the lost pieces of himself and regain his memories, find out who he really is, and each piece basically that he finds will give him more memories and let him kind of figure out who he was and what's going on. And so this book has, it starts out with, before he even kind of realizes any of this, the feel of just this kind of like creature almost, before we start to see him become more of a human and really start to learn how the world works. And for the most of the story, he is in the body of a 19-year-old, but he's not really sure if that's his original body or like kind of how that happened. But we see him really learning about the world and how things work for the first time. And though he has some like instincts and some like faint memories that he can't quite tell what they are supposed to be, most things are pretty completely new to him. And he's learning about how the world, like I said, really works. And learning, of course, about not only the physical realities of the world, but also the more complex emotions of love and betrayal and anger. And we really get a lot of commentary and philosophy around memories and how much memories have to do with who a person is. Do your memories define you, or do your experiences define how you're going to be? So if, we get the question of, if somebody who doesn't have any memories of who they were starts experiencing things and becomes a certain kind of person, well, if they get their memories back, then is that going to change who they are? Is that who they always were? And so there's a really great discussion kind of around how that actually works, which was done in a fascinating way. But we have almost kind of like this mystery unfolding, because he really doesn't know what's happened, and he makes some assumptions as he goes through the story, but he doesn't know a ton. And then the world that's being created as well is very fascinating, because we learn about this great war that happened thousands of years ago between all kinds of different types of magic users. We had an empire that was formed and run by what are called demonologists, who are magic users who basically they summon demons and use demons to do their bidding, to power anything from like magical swords and armor to like crushing grain to like doors so that they only open for certain people. Like their entire civilization was based on using demons to do basically everything. We also have the more kind of traditional wizards. Even they have a spin where they use chaos magic, and that's what they use in order to do their magic, is they like pull on that power of chaos. And then we have also elementalists who can exert some control on elementals, and it goes into more depth there too, because it's not like there are just like specific types of like water or fire that are elementals. It's kind of like looking at that all of the elements are at their heart elementals, like water, fire, everything. It's even said like the ocean itself is just this supremely old and powerful water elemental that would basically be impossible to control. The same with like mountains or like great earth elementals, but they're so old, so big, so strong, it would be basically impossible to actually control those types of things. But we get more in depth there. We have necromancers as well, and we get to learn more about that. And so just all of these different kinds of magic and learning about this war that happened, and something we don't fully know what happened at the end of this book even. Something, though, caused the demonologists to lose, and then the wizards kind of took over and became the New World Order, and they tried to wipe out all of the other magic users so that only they would then have power. And so that's kind of the overall plot and some of the world that we get. I'm not considering any of that a spoiler because it doesn't directly relate to the plot. It's just we learn more about what has happened in that way, basically, and what made the world the way that it is. And so there was some really interesting world building that we get there. We learn a lot more about how these different people work, about the magic systems, about the world, and that stuff I'm not going to get into because I don't want to get into spoilers at this point. But the world building was really great, and then just the character study really of Crane was just fascinating, looking at someone who doesn't have their memories and is trying to determine who they're going to become, and if they're going to become a new person, or if by getting their memories through unwittingly going to become the person that they used to be. We get lots of conversations about, what makes good and evil. We're looking at these, different sides of a war that happened thousands of years ago and how they're defined differently. And then the book also has a pretty strong emphasis on race, where Crane is black, and in the north where he is, there's basically no one else that is. And as he journeys out, we do find out that there are other people of different races besides white, but they are all looked down on, and it all stems from the fact that the ancient empire basically was run by demonologists who were from like an area deep in the south and were black, and so it was looked at as like, oh, your soul is tainted and that's why you're black. And it sounds so crazy because of the fact that like that's actually the type of thing that you can hear in our own world. Not that long ago, when you look at kind of race things like that, but it's the way that we look at that, where it's about race, but it's also more about the different kinds of magic user and how basically those correlate, but how they are different as well. And so we get some commentary there as well, and really a ton of interesting stuff going on. But really it's the journey that you go on, learning more, figuring out what's going on, and then the twists and turns along the way that made this just a really fascinating story to read, and I am very excited for the second one. I do want to talk a little bit of spoilers for this one, so I am going to jump into the spoiler section. You can use the timestamps if you want to skip past this part and just get to the summary at the end, if you do not want any spoilers at all, if you haven't read the book yet. So check that to skip past, but from here on I am going to get into just a few spoilers because I want to talk a little bit more in depth. So I talked a lot about the background of kind of the world in Crane, and so the part that I didn't want to specifically say in the non-spoiler section is Crane finds out that he was the Empire. He was the Emperor of the Demonologists, and extremely powerful, and he finds out all kinds of things that he's done he sees as evil, and he's stuck between thinking that his old self was evil and not wanting to be him, but also having the urges and the kind of the desires of his old self from the memories that he starts to gather and figuring it out as well. I loved getting a glimpse into that old world and like his floating obsidian castle and some other hell. And the dynamic between, the different dynamics between him and Shalane, who he meets before he really knows who he is, and looks at himself very, very differently, and then his dynamic with Henka were so fascinating to take a look at, because you do see pretty clearly that Henka seems to know more than she's letting on, and is steering him in the right direction, or at least what she sees as the right direction. And I did see it coming that it was going to turn out that she was his wife, basically, or at least that she was around and knew him very personally from thousands of years ago. But the epilogue of this book was just fantastic and set up, without giving a cliffhanger, set up the next book so perfectly, where basically in one of the memories that are divested, he warns himself to not trust her, basically. And it's still made where it's not entirely clear if we're talking about Henka or if we're talking about the god, or if they're somehow interrelated, but that part especially just really hooked me and made me very much want to read the next book. So I inspired, I wanted to touch on it, because I really enjoyed the book, but I read that epilogue, and that was my favorite part, not because the rest of the book wasn't really good, but because I liked that part so freaking much. So overall, this was a really good book. I rated this 4 out of 5, something I really, really enjoyed, and I'm very excited to read more. It was a pretty quick read, it did not take that long, and there were just a lot of really great elements to it. I will say that Fletcher is considered mostly a grimdark author. I don't know if I would call this grimdark per se. There are definitely a lot of dark parts, and parts that feel like it's going to be grimdark, but other parts have a very different tone, like I said. He meshes these different tones into one narrative very skillfully, and so there were parts that definitely were not nearly as dark as I would have expected, just from what I'd heard about some of the other books, but also there were parts where it gets pretty dark. So it's kind of like it's in the realm. I don't know if it would be considered full-on grimdark. It's definitely in the realm, but keep that in mind if you are looking to read this, just based on what your tastes are. But those really are my thoughts on Blackstone Heart. I am very excited to read She Dreams in Blood, and will probably be reading it much too soon for my TBR's sake, despite the fact that I have a lot of stuff to read next month. Probably going to read it really soon anyway, and we'll see. I'll probably post an unlisted review for that one once I get it out. Or just talk about it in a wrap-up, because I'm trying not to do so many sequel reviews, just because it's harder for those unless you've read the first one. But really, that's where I'm going to end this, on talking about Blackstone Heart by Michael R. Fletcher. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to join the conversation there. I'll also link out to Slowly Red's Discord, since I mentioned him as well, so that you can check that out as well if you want to learn more about Grimdark, or chat with Fletcher there, even when he's around there too, which is pretty cool. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, then make sure to subscribe.